So good evening, everybody. Hope I am audible. Video is clear. Yeah. So good evening, Kalpesh, Nitesh, Anurag. So we will be here to discussing AIMS PG June 2020. So this paper, who has attempted, try to find out what mistake they done. What are the I will analyze every questions, and who are preparing for it, try to make a strategy how they plan for a AIMS exam. So without wasting any more time, I will come to direct to the questions. So first, read this question carefully. See, diphtheria vaccine is a which type of vaccine? It's a killed live toxoid or polysaccharide. Okay, so this diphtheria vaccine is a which type of vaccine? So by this question, I told this type of question come very frequently in AIMS and PGI. So we supposed to know what are the killed vaccine, what are the live vaccines, what are the toxoid, and what are the polysaccharide. So it will assure our further question in all the exam. See, this is the live vaccines. Live vaccines are BCG, OPV, MMR, varicella, rotavirus, yellow fever. Yeah, for live vaccine, there is a mnemonic. We are mama's boy. We are mama's boy. V means varicella, R means rotavirus, M measles, M MMR, D BCG, O oral polio, Y typhoid. So we are mama's boy. These are the live vaccines. We are mama's boy. These are the live vaccine. Now killed vaccine. Injectable polio, rabies, hepatitis B, and influenza. I HIRA, HIIR, IPV, influenza, rabies, and hepatitis A. These are the killed vaccines. Now concentrate here. Pertussoid, when we called pertussoid whole cell vaccine, it is killed vaccine. And pertussoid acellular vaccine, it's a subunit vaccine. It's a subunit vaccine. So these four are classical killed vaccine: IPV, rabies, hepatitis A, and influenza. These are mama's boy. We are mama's boy is live vaccine. Now these are subunit vaccine. These are subunit vaccine. Okay, and toxoid are diphtheria and tetanus. So toxoid we will never forget. Diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid. Live we will never forget. We are mama's boy. Killed HIIR, HIRR, hepatitis A, IPV, influenza, and rabies. How will you remember this R belong to rotavirus or this R belong to rabies? Mama's boy, O is there, and rotavirus also O is there. So this is R belong to rotavirus. Varicella, rotavirus, MMR, measles, BCG, oral polio, yellow fever. Hepatitis A, IPV, influenza, rabies is a killed vaccine. Now come to the subunit vaccine. When AIMS is asking details, so they can ask you which of the following is a recombinant vaccine. So hepatitis B is a recombinant vaccine. All are subunit vaccines. Hib, pneumococcal, meningococcal, and typhoid, they are polysaccharide vaccine. So now it's very clear. If this type of question comes, which of the following is a live vaccine? You can easily write mama's boy, VR, live vaccine. Killed vaccine, HIIR, H hepatitis A, I influenza, I IPV, and R for rabies. Okay, then toxoid, diphtheria, and tetanus toxoid are the killed vaccine, are the killed toxoid. These all are the killed subunit and toxoid, all are killed vaccine which require multiple doses, But if we categorize this, diphtheria and tetanus is a toxoid. Hepatitis B, pertussoid A component. Hib, pneumococcal, meningococcal, and typhoid, they are polysaccharide vaccines. And these are particular killed vaccine. So come to our question again. Diphtheria is a which type of vaccine? It is toxoid vaccines. So those who are attempted, it's right. But those who are preparing, just remember this chart, just remember this chart. You may get a question again in the AIMS about the vaccine. So this is the thing. These are the live vaccine. We are mama's boy is live vaccine. Hira, HIIR. Hepatitis A, influenza, IPV, and rabies killed vaccine. These four are polysaccharide vaccines. And type toxoid, diphtheria, and tetanus toxoid. So I hope live killed subunit and toxoid vaccine is clear to you. It's clear to you. Okay. So this about the vaccine. This about the vaccine. Okay. Now, which deficiency present in neonatal seizure? We discussed this in vitamins class. It's a very simple pyridoxine deficiency. Pyridoxine deficiency. Yeah. So what is occur with the thiamine deficiency? It is very riboflavin, circumcorneal vascularization. Circumcorneal vascularization. Niacin deficiency, pellagra. Pyridoxine deficiency, neonatal seizures can occur. Can anybody tell me any condition which is pyridoxine dependent, any metabolic disease? You may find question in previous aims. This was the question. Which of the following is a pyridoxine dependent condition? Homocysteine, urea. It's a pyridoxine dependent condition. Another is pyridoxine dependent neonatal seizures. So why pyridoxine causes deficiency, causes seizure? See, in our brain, this is there. Glutamate. This glutamate is converted into GABA. This glutamate is converted into GABA. So glutamate is a excitatory. Glutamate is a excitatory neurotransmitter. GABA is a inhibitory neurotransmitter. Conversion is depend upon glutamate acid decarboxylase enzyme, and it is pyridoxal dependent condition in the presence of pyridoxine. If pyridoxine is deficient, what happens? This enzyme will not work properly. Glutamate acid decarboxylase. So glutamate level in the blood is increased, which is a excitatory neurotransmitter, So there is an imbalance between excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitter. So in the pyridoxine dependency, it leads to neonatal seizure. Now key point, a neonate present with seizure and their seizure is refractory, not responding to anticonvulsant, If you give pyridoxine, it will respond. It is the classical of pyridoxine dependent seizure. It's a characteristic of pyridoxine B6 dependent seizure. So why it's occur? Because there is an imbalance between excitatory neurotransmitter and inhibitory neurotransmitter. Because pyridoxine is responsible for conversion of glutamate to GABA. When pyridoxine deficiencies occur, so excitatory neurotransmitter will be increased. So imbalance occur, predisposed to seizure. The key point, these seizures are refractory. They don't respond to anticonvulsant. We need to give pyridoxine. And all these things, very circumcorneal vascularization, pellagra, 3D, I have discussed in my vitamins class very well. So this question occur, which of the following present with neonatal seizures? So it's a pyridoxine deficiency which present with a neonatal seizure. So now come to not a feature of severe dehydration. In my previous classes, I told you when paper set by respected senior old generation examiners, their diarrhea, PM, their favorite topic, vaccine, their favorite topic. Yes, in this AIMS paper, question on vaccine is there, question on diarrhea is there, question on PM is there. So not a feature of severe dehydration. It's very easy question. I told in my class, so dehydration is either no dehydration, some dehydration, or severe dehydration. First 2 points are very important. So what happened in some dehydration? Child is irritable. Child is irritable. In severe dehydration, child is lethargic. Some dehydration, child is thirsty. And severe dehydration, not able to drink. If child comes to us with a loose motion since last 2 days, when you are taking the history, you ask from the mother, is child taking water? Mother tell, yeah. Child drinks repeatedly but very irritable. Child is irritable and thirsty. Child is having some dehydration. When mother respond, she is not taking anything, is dull, lethargic. It is severe dehydration. So we need these two signs. Rest all sign in help us to assess the dehydration, because eye shrunken, very shrunken, skin turgor delayed, markedly delayed, tongue and mouth dry, very dry. All these are subjective phenomena. Suppose I feel these eyes are markedly shrunken. Mother told me these original eyes are like this. So these are subjective. We need to concentrate on these first 2 points. These first 2 points. See, in our question, drowsy child, severe dehydration. Skin retract slowly, severe dehydration. Shrunken fontanelle, severe dehydration. C or D can occur in some dehydration also, but child thirsty is not a sign of some severe dehydration. It's a sign of some dehydration. If child is thirsty, is a sign of some dehydration. It's not a feature of severe dehydration. I hope I am clear to you. Thirsty child, irritable child is a sign of some dehydration. It's one of the favorite question in AIIMS. 3 years back, they asked, a 2-year-old child presented to you with loose motion since last 2 days. Child is irritable and thirsty. What is the initial treatment? Means they are asking the treatment of some dehydration. When some dehydration, we use treatment plan B. When no dehydration, we use treatment plan A. When severe dehydration, we use treatment plan C. I am not going in the detail of these treatment plan. I have already discussed in my diarrhea class. So treat plan B is we need to give ORS for 4 hours. We need to give ORS for 4 hours. And plan C, we need to give IV fluid. IV fluid. If you want to learn this clearly, go to my class on diarrhea. But this question is favorite, one of the AIIMS question. No, some severe dehydration. What are the signs which suggest child is having no dehydration, some dehydration, all are the sign of some dehydration, all are the sign of severe dehydration, except, and what is the treatment of some and severe dehydration? You need to remember this. Now come to this. This question is little bit simple. Vitamin D synthesis sequence is, you called it, it's a biochemistry question, it's a physiology question, or it's a pediatric question, because in pediatrics we read vitamin D thoroughly in rickets. Okay, so vitamin D synthesized first in skin, then in liver, then in kidney. It's a simple question. Now see, you see 7-hydroxy cholesterol in skin. So this is vitamin D3. Then reaches to liver, where hydroxylation occur. It becomes 25-hydroxy vitamin D3. Then it reaches to kidney in presence of 1-alpha hydroxylase, active form of vitamin D from D3 form. It is 125 dihydroxy vitamin D3, which help in the mineralization of bone, which help in the calcium absorption. So our question is very simple. What is the sequence of vitamin D synthesis? Yeah, it is skin followed by liver followed by kidney. This they ask in the question. Vitamin D synthesis sequence is skin, liver and kidney. I don't think any confusion in this question. Now come to this. A child with high grade fever, drooling of saliva, next best management step is. The first thing we need to find out with these two findings, what is this condition? What is this condition? Child with high grade fever and drooling of saliva. Child with high grade fever and drooling of saliva. What is this condition? Then only be able to answer this question. What is this condition? Dr. Maya is asking, telling croup. Yeah, one can be croup, but I want more answer from your side. Ankita is answer acute epiglottitis. Yeah, somebody more acute epiglottitis. Croup. It can be Ludwig angina. It can be diphtheria, drooling of saliva. So what is the approach of this question? We supposed to know everything about this thing. So see, Child with high grade fever and drooling of saliva. Only two features are giving. Drooling of saliva means palatal palsy is there or upper airway obstruction is there. Okay. So if we consider palatal palsy, then we consider it's diphtheria. But diphtheria, palatal palsy occur in the beginning of second week and can occur late also. That time palatal palsy occur, child become afebrile. That time no fever is there, so it can't be diphtheria. Child is having high grade fever, just concentrate, high grade fever, drooling of saliva. So it can't be croup. Croup is a viral infection, parainfluenza infection. So in croup, child is having not so high grade fever, not toxic. So it's something condition which is acute fulminating condition in which child condition deteriorate very significantly, very rapidly. This is the condition. So what is this? This is acute epiglottitis. It is acute epiglottitis. Acute epiglottitis. It's a acute fulminating condition. Acute fulminating condition having rapid progressive course. Child comes with a high grade fever and throat pain within hours, develop air hunger, respiratory distress, drooling of saliva. So this is high grade fever, drooling of saliva. It's a acute epiglottitis. Child is devoid of air. Child present in air hunger in a tripod position. See, this is the tripod position. Child and bend forward and extension of the neck. This is a tripod position. Bend forward and extension of the neck. So epiglottis should be straight. It's a tripod position. Tripod position. Drooling of saliva in a toxic child. Tripod position with drooling of saliva in a toxic child is epiglottitis. Epiglottitis. Epiglottitis is caused by H. influenzae. It's H. influenzae. The characteristic feature is it is having rapid progressive course. It is having rapid progressive course. Epiglottitis, rapid progressive course. Now, child comes to us with this feature in night, midnight, 12 o'clock. Child comes to us with a high grade fever, drooling of saliva, toxic look, air hunger, bend forward, neck extension in tripod position like this. Child is doing like this. So make a diagnosis of epiglottitis. How you confirm? We need to see the epiglottitis by laryngoscopy. Very risky, very risky. If you able to see, you can see right cherry epiglottitis. Your diagnosis is sure. Otherwise, go for lateral neck X-ray. Lateral neck X-ray. You find swollen epiglottitis. This is thumb sign. Thumb sign. This is thumb sign. See clearly. This is thumb sign. Thumb sign. Lateral chest X-ray. Swollen epiglottitis. Thumb sign in lateral neck X-ray present in epiglottitis. Epiglottitis is red cherry like. If you do laryngoscopy, sometime child may crash. The ideal treatment: intubate the child. If child is in air hunger, intubate the child and start antibiotics. Generally, keep the child intubated for 2 to 3 days because antibiotic will definitely work in this condition in 2 to 3 days and child become less toxic. Yes, Shweta, ceftriaxone, you are right. Either we give ceftriaxone or meropenem or may give ampicillin also. Yeah, ceftriaxone is the choice. We give ceftriaxone, ampicillin or meropenem is toxic. Nelson says 3 drugs: ampicillin, ceftriaxone or meropenem. We can give if we suspect acute epiglottitis in the child. So it's a very good question. It's a very good question because in epiglottitis, it is specifically written no role of steroid and adrenaline nebulization. Somebody initially make a diagnosis of croup. Croup means acute laryngotracheal bronchitis. Then definitely we give nebulization with adrenaline. But the key point in this feature is child is having high grade fever, toxic look and drooling of saliva. Toxic look and drooling of saliva. It's a key point. It's a very important AIMS based question, typically AIMS question, in which you are very much clear in concept, clinical concept, then you are able to answer it. Child with high grade fever, because drooling of saliva, first thing come palatal palsy. But diphtheria, when palatal palsy occur, child become afebrile. So it can't be diphtheria. It can't be croup, because child is not very toxic, not high grade fever in croup. So it has to be toxic condition, which is acute epiglottitis. I am again repeating, this is the tripod position in acute epiglottitis caused by H. influenzae, and it is the thumb sign, lateral neck X-ray. The treatment is you need to give rapid antibiotic. Initially, give rapid antibiotic. No role of steroid or adrenaline nebulization. It is acute epiglottitis. Three conditions you need to remember when the respiratory infection, the things about respiratory infection comes. You need to remember these three things. See, epiglottitis, just a minute. Epiglottitis, bronchiolitis, and acute LTB. Another name for acute LTB is croup. Epiglottitis is caused by, you need to remember, epiglottitis is caused by H. influenzae. Bronchiolitis is caused by respiratory syncytial virus. Respiratory syncytial virus. NCD, yes, it is an emergency condition. Acute epiglottitis is an emergency. I told you it's better you intubate the child, because child is in so much distress, high grade fever, drooling of saliva, there is a high chance he may aspirate the secretions. So it's better to intubate the child and start high antibiotic. Yes, it's an emergency. Any condition which warrant intubation, it's an emergency condition. Acute LTB is caused by para-influenza virus. Acute LTB, acute laryngotracheal bronchitis. Yeah, Shashank, it's right. It's caused by para-influenza virus. So you need to remember these three conditions. You need to remember epiglottitis is caused by H. influenzae. Bronchiolitis is caused by respiratory syncytial virus, and acute LTB is caused by para-influenza virus. You need to remember these three conditions. You get MCQ on these three, but this MCQ, it's a very good AIMS based MCQ. With the 2 points you need to diagnose the condition. High dose of antibiotic need to be given. Now, which of the following true about celiac disease? Which of the following is true about celiac disease? A very good question. Celiac disease question come in the exams, probably 3-4 question in last 20 years. So celiac disease, it's a good question. So can cause GI lymphoma. What is our approach in this type of question? Can cause GI lymphoma? Don't know. CT scan required for a diagnosis? No. We know biopsy or some serological test is needed for diagnosis. Improve with complex carbohydrate food like bread and pasta? Definitely no. We need to give gluten-free diet, that is barley, maize, but not the bread and pasta. Okay. Most common cause of malabsorption in the developing country, we don't know. So B and C will easily rule out. It's not diagnosed by CT scan. It's not improved by pasta. 2 we have ruled out. Then what is the answer? Either 1, A or D. Now somebody is asking developed country. I am not sure whether I got the answer from the various students. It's developing country. So it developed, whatever it's developed or developing. Celiac disease is not the common cause of malabsorption. In developing country, it's the cow milk, cow protein allergy. Below 2 years, this is the commonest cause of diarrhea and malabsorption, cow protein allergy. Okay, so definitely celiac disease is not the commonest cause of malabsorption in developing country in younger children. If we specify the age, after 5 years, if a child come with malabsorption, first thing will come in our mind is celiac disease only. But as is Dot mentioned the choice, so this is also rule out. Then answer is GI lymphoma. T cell lymphoma are common in celiac disease. T cell lymphomas are common in celiac disease. They may occur because repeated stimulation of gluten. The people who are not taking the gluten-free diet, repeated exposure to gluten predispose the site for malignant proliferation. So they are prone for T cell lymphoma. So correct answer would be A. At this stage, you should know definitely something about celiac disease because questions are awaited on this. This is an enteropathy caused by permanent sensitivity to gluten in genetically susceptible individual. Yes, it is genetically susceptible in individual, particularly HLA groups having susceptibility. No need to going in detail which genetics, which genes. So some genetic individual have susceptibility to gluten. If they are exposed to gluten, that gluten causes damage in their enterocytes. Enteropathy. It's enteropathy caused by permanent sensitivity of gluten. Now for pre-PG, this question comes. These are the high risk group. Once it asks in the exam, which of the following is prone for celiac disease? Yes, Down syndrome is prone for celiac disease. Turner syndrome patients prone for celiac disease. Williams syndrome prone for celiac disease. These three we need to remember. Remember Down, Turner, and Williams. First degree relatives, definitely celiac disease. Then autoimmune disease, autoimmune thyroid disease, autoimmune liver disease. This also we can remember. And then diabetes mellitus type 1. So all of the following predispose to celiac disease: Down, Turner, Williams syndrome, autoimmune disease of liver and thyroid, first degree relative, and diabetes mellitus type 1. This question was asked 4-5 years back in pre-PG, central pre-PG, that all are true about Down syndrome except, so D choice was prone for celiac disease. Yes, the Down patients are prone to develop celiac disease. Now see, clinical feature: diarrhea, growth failure, and anemia. A temporal association of diarrhea, introduction of wheat products. History you will give a typical history. 6 month baby is on breastfeed. 7 month mother added dalia, suji, cerelac in the feed. Okay, so as soon wheat introduced into the diet, child start having diarrhea. 6 motion, 7 motion, 8 motion in a day. That there is a temporal association of diarrhea. Temporal association means when you start wheat, then diarrhea occurs. Temporal association means as you start wheat. Suppose you introduce wheat in 8 months, then diarrhea will start from 8 months. If you introduce wheat at 1 year, then diarrhea will start at 1 year. This is the mean of temporal association. The amount of wheat is more, all feed are contain of meat, diarrhea is more. If you restrict wheat diarrhea for a 1 or 2 feeds, so diarrhea will be less. So it's a temporal association. Diarrhea depend upon time of wheat introduction in the diet and quantity of wheat in the diet. More may present without diarrhea. This is the important thing. May present without diarrhea in refractory iron deficiency anemia, short stature, delayed puberty, rickets. There is a malabsorption. If you consume gluten repeatedly, what happened? This is the enterocyte. So they damage. They damage. So ultimately, absorptive property of gut is hampered when they damage. So what happened? Iron is not absorbed. Iron absorption occur maximum in duodenum. So iron will not absorb. Then whenever you get a case of short stature, 1DD is always celiac disease. Patient presented with short stature, growth failure, severe anemia, you need to investigate for celiac disease. They don't present with diarrhea. They present with diarrhea. But without diarrhea, you can also suspect celiac disease in iron deficiency anemia, short stature, delayed puberty, and rickets. For an MCQ point of view, these are the serological tests by which we can diagnose celiac disease. So these are IgA, antibody against tissue transglutaminase. So this is TTG. Other antibody is IgA endomysial antibody. So this is the basic investigation. If child come to a pediatrician with a complaint of short stature, not growing well, passing loose motions, chronic diarrhea. Okay, so what he generally do, he advise do a level of TTG. TTG. Just if it is increased, then he refer the child to pediatric gastroenterologist. If it's normal, this can't rule out TTG, because in most high risk population there is sometimes IgA deficiency also occur. If IgA deficiency occur, this will not increase. So it's just a screening test. If it is increased, yeah, you can suspect it can be celiac disease based on your clinical history. But definitely diagnosis by biopsy. Definitely diagnosis by biopsy, because GI endoscopy also sometimes normal. So diagnosis based on biopsy, histology finding, where cleft length increase, WBC number in enterocytes increase, and villus atrophy will be there. So this is the thing in the gut. What happened? The WBC, you find abundance number of WBC in the hair. Lot of WBC. So biopsy is the classical finding of celiac disease. You can diagnose. Serology can be negative, but you can remember for MCQ what are the tests to be done. That is TTG and endomycin antibody. TTG and endomycin antibody. Okay. So now clinical feature compatible with the diagnosis. Diagnosis, first and foremost thing, clinical feature. Clinical feature means temporal association with introduction of wheat in the diet. Then positive intestinal biopsy. I told you biopsy is more important, with or without serology. Serology may be normal or may be abnormal, but yes, positive intestinal biopsy is must. And response to gluten-free diet within 12 weeks. Within 12 weeks, what you did. Patient having diarrhea from 7 months of age, approach to a doctor at 8 months of age, complain of diarrhea since last 2 months, having anemia, not growing well, weight is constant. So what you did a TTG. TTG increase, you shift the patient to pediatric gastroenterologist. They do a biopsy, diagnosis of celiac disease is made. So what second step? Now gluten-free diet. Now they give them a list. These food need to be taken and these food need to be avoided. These food need to be avoided and these to be taken. They remain on gluten-free diet for 12 weeks. Okay, in 12 weeks, positive response should become in terms of clinical features. Their anemia start improving, their weight is start increasing, loose motion control. Sometime pediatric gastroenterologist again repeat the biopsy. All changes which occur in first biopsy will disappear in second biopsy when patient is on gluten-free diet. Gluten-free diet. So these are things you need to remember about the celiac disease. This question is okay. It causes GI lymphoma, T cell lymphoma. These rest are not possible. But what is celiac disease? Celiac disease is a sensitivity to gluten in genetically susceptible individual. These are the high risk group: Turner, Williams, Down syndrome, autoimmune disease of thyroid and liver, and diabetes mellitus and first degree relative. Diarrhea, growth failure, anemia. It can present. Is it completely cured, sir? NCD asking. Yes. If you don't introduce gluten in the diet, nothing will occur. It's a sensitivity to gluten. People will do very well. The key, you need to diagnose early. You need to pick it early. Put the patient on gluten-free diet. Nothing will be happen. He's like a normal person. Normal. It can be cured. Yes. Put the patient on gluten-free diet. It may present without chronic diarrhea. These are the serological. TTG and endomycin antibody increase, and biopsy is the diagnostic. Serology may be normal. Serology may be normal. This much you need to know about gluten or enteropathy or celiac disease. Now, which of the following is incorrect for RH compatibility? You can argue me this question can be discussed in biochemistry, can be discussed in pathology. You may the answer, you may know the answer, but I also want to discuss this question because RH incompatibility is something is to be done with neonatologists, pediatricians. So I mean all of you are know the answer, all are putting it D, so it's a correct. See, what is RH incompatibility? When mother is positive, baby is negative. Okay, in India, for every 20 female, 19 blood group is positive, 1 blood group is negative. Sorry, I have written. If mother is negative, baby is positive. Just a minute, just a minute, just a minute. No confusion. No confusion. If mother is negative, baby is positive. Baby is positive. What happened? What happened? This first delivery will be normal, but at the time of delivery, this positive sensitizes the mother. Now mother has an antibody against this positive fetus. Mother again positive, again pregnant, again baby will come. So now with previous pregnancy, there are antibodies are there. These antibody will destroy this baby. This, so there will be pallor and jaundice. When third pregnancy occur, because of previous two pregnancy sensitization, there are lot of antibody. So they cause erythroblastus fetalis. Out of 20, one mother blood group is negative, 19 mother blood group is positive. So this is erythroblastus fetalis. How can we prevent this? As soon as first baby deliver, we give anti-D to mother. So this antibody will not form. This will be normal. Second delivery, we give anti-D to mother. This antibody will not form. This will also be normal. If mother blood group is negative, be prepared for anti-D antibody. Now what happened? Rh incompatibility is the example of hemolytic jaundice because RBC hemolyzed. Now see, if RBC hemolyzed produce hemoglobin. This hemoglobin produce biliverdin, and this biliverdin convert into bilirubin. This bilirubin enter into the liver. This is unconjugate bilirubin. Then it become conjugate bilirubin. Conjugate bilirubin excreted via bile duct reaches into intestine. Intestine it acted upon by bacteria, which convert it into stercobilinogen and urobilinogen. Stercobilinogen and urobilinogen. So one thing is clear. In Rh incompatibility, there is an increased hemolysis to raised unconjugated bilirubin. This is clear. Raised unconjugate bilirubin. This is bilirubin unconjugated because more RBC get hemolyzed. So one is clear. Now second, raised stool urobilinogen, raised urine urobilinogen. Yes. When more unconjugate bilirubin reach here, more unconjugate will convert into conjugate, more conjugate will enter into the gut, and more conjugate will convert into stercobilinogen and urobilinogen. So urobilinogen in stool will increase, urobilinogen in urine will increase. Now see, last choice, increase urine bilirubin. What you say about this? Is it right or wrong? If it's wrong, why it's wrong? It's right or wrong? If it's wrong, why it's wrong? Now, increase urine bilirubin. Blood unconjugated bilirubin is more. Unconjugated bilirubin is non-water soluble. It will never come in urine. Blood unconjugated bilirubin is raised, but urine it not present. Now I will give you a good concept. See here. Just a minute. See, this is liver. This is bile duct, and then it's come to intestine. This is unconjugate bilirubin, then it convert into conjugate bilirubin. Conjugate bilirubin via bile duct reaches to intestine. If there is a biliary obstruction, choledochal cyst, biliary atresia, this conjugate bilirubin will not come into the gut. Obstructive jaundice, bilirubin not come into the gut. So we get pale color stool. And then bilirubin is not comes here. This is conjugate bilirubin. It spill from here. reaches to blood and then kidney and excreted via kidney. Conjugate bilirubin can come in the urine. So urine is yellow color. This make the diagnosis. 8-day, 9-day, 10-day old baby, if having jaundice, mother says urine is very yellow, then ask what is the color of stool. He will say color of stool is white, pale color stool. Diagnosis confirmed. It is obstructive jaundice. It is obstructive jaundice because urine give pink. Urine give yellow color. Why urine give yellow color? Because conjugate bilirubin comes into urine. Conjugate bilirubin come into urine, not unconjugated. Unconjugated bilirubin will not come in urine. It is not water soluble. So RH incompatibility, what happened? Unconjugated bilirubin increase in the blood. Increase urine bilirubin, not there. Okay, if urine bilirubin is increased, you suspect it is a obstructive jaundice. Urine color more yellow, stool white color. Urine color more yellow, stool white color, obstructive jaundice. Okay, I hope I am clear in this. Which of the following is incorrect for RH incompatibility? Increase urine bilirubin. This is not correct. Okay. Kalpesh is asking bilirubin converted to lumirubin by phototherapy. Now that is the mechanism. That is bilirubin will convert into lumirubin. So it is the inert substance which is excreted via kidney. It will not give any color to urine. When we keep the child, it's not there. We put the RH incompatibility child into phototherapy. Phototherapy convert the bilirubin into lumirubin. Then lumirubin come in the urine. Yeah, it is excreted via urine, but it doesn't give the color to the urine. Okay. So unconjugated bilirubin will never come into the urine as it is. Okay, this question was asked in the exam. You can send the correct question to me, Kalpesh, in my Telegram group. I will answer it. Now, Guillain-Barré syndrome treatment, all are used except. So what is Guillain-Barré syndrome? GBS. What is Guillain-Barré syndrome? GBS. What is this? Yeah, answer is everybody's knows steroid is not given. But what is this? What are the other questions? Yeah, everybody is right. Vivek, Wings, Krish, Gayatri, everybody is right. Kalpesh, you are giving the right answer. But see, Guillain-Barré syndrome. Remember this. It's a acute, ascending, symmetrical, flaccid paralysis. Each and every word has importance. It's an acute. Patient develop paralysis within 14 days. Ascending. First lower limbs involved. 3 days patient limb. Another 3 days not able to stand. Then paralysis involve the upper limb. It's ascending paralysis. Symmetrical. What weakness you get in the right limb? Same in the left limb. Same. If lower limb 4/5, right? 4/5 left. Symmetrical. If it's asymmetrical, it's become polio. If asymmetrical, it is polio. Symmetrical. When you examine, it's a flaccid paralysis. Now question comes. If a child comes to you with acute ascending symmetrical flaccid paralysis, you make the diagnosis of GBS. Once you write the diagnosis of GBS and you didn't read the child, it's a crime. Why it's a crime? Why it's a crime? Just understand, it's ascending paralysis. Paralysis may ascend. Lower limb with ascending, it may reach to diaphragm, respiratory muscle, and patient gone. It's ascending paralysis. So we need to block the ascent of paralysis. As soon as we make the diagnosis of GBS, we need to give IVIG. We need to give immunoglobulins. What immunoglobulin does? It blocks the ascent of paralysis. LGB is a self-limiting condition. Recovery is 100%. Recovery is 100%. But we need to block the ascent of paralysis. We need to prevent intercostal muscle, diaphragm, respiratory muscle, cranial nerves to be involved in the LGB. If they involve, morbidity and mortality is high. So IVIG is used. Same principle, we can use the plasmapheresis to remove the autoantibodies in it. IVIG to block the ascent of paralysis. Suppose LGB presented to us late when respiratory muscle involved, we give the ventilatory support. We put the patient on ventilator. Now the paralysis ascend, 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 all muscle involved. When patient comes to you, very sick condition, you intubate the child. Okay, what happened? Your child is intubated and you are dilemma in the diagnosis, every muscle will get involved. The beauty of LGB is recovery occur in reverse direction. The muscles which involve late recover first. And recovery. Child is out of ventilatory support. But we should not wait. The child should go on ventilator, then we treat. Our purpose to block the ascent of paralysis. For that, we give IVIG, we do plasmapheresis, ventilatory support, yes. But corticosteroid having no role. Corticosteroid having no role in the treatment of GBS. Corticosteroid having no role in the treatment of GBS. Now, two MCQs comes here. When a child present with acute ascending symmetrical flaccid paralysis, ask from the mother, is there history of loose motion 15 days back, or there is history of recurrent respiratory infection 15 days back? Mother will tell yes. If it is occur after loose motion, the commonest organism is Campylobacter jejuni. If GBS occur after respiratory infection, the commonest organism is Mycoplasma pneumoniae. Commonest organism is Mycoplasma pneumoniae. So this occur. A child presented to you with acute ascending symmetrical flaccid paralysis. CSF shows albinocytological association. Child is a history of loose motion 2 week back, which is the commonest agent for this. Campylobacter jejuni. Campylobacter jejuni. Now see, when we do the lumbar puncture, what happened? Cells normal. Only protein increase. Cells normal, only protein increase. This is called albuminocytological dissociation, and it is classic of Guillain-Barré. Albuminocytological dissociation. This is classical of Guillain-Barré syndrome. Cells normal, only protein increase. Albuminocytological dissociation. So you need to remember these things about LGB, caused by loose motion and respiratory infection. If loose motion, Campylobacter jejuni is the commonest organism. If after respiratory infection, Mycoplasma pneumoniae is the commonest organism. CSF show albuminocytological dissociation. How can we differentiate from polio? Polio, there is a asymmetrical paralysis. Polio, there is a residual paralysis. But in LGB, recovery is same. Shweta is asking, botulism having same presentation? No, Shweta, botulism having different presentation. Neuropathy, botulism is a different picture. Botulism, myasthenia, progressive fatigability, neuromuscular disorders, floppy baby, yes. But progressive fatigability is involvement of neuromuscular is there. Botulism presentation is different. Campylobacter jejuni is different. It's a ascending paralysis. It's a ascending paralysis. Remember, ascending, it's an acute ascending paralysis, LGB. Now, a child comes to you with VSD. What symptom will improve following the operation of VSD? What answer you put in this? First, it's look very easy question. I don't think why this question comes. If I am getting the alternate right choices right, all these are the choices or any changes there. Arrhythmia improve, failure to thrive improve, heart block improve, respiratory alkalosis improve. These are the choices given this. A child comes to you with VSD. What symptom will improve following the operation of VSD? Yeah. What are the feature of VSD? See how the VSD present. See it. Just a minute. RA, LA, RV, LV. This is pulmonary artery taking blood to the lung, and this is aorta taking blood to the body. Now see, here is the pure blood from LA to LV goes to body. Now this is the impure blood from RA to RV goes to lung. If there is a VSD, this is the VSD. This is the VSD. So what happen if VSD is there? What happen if VSD is there? So what happen if VSD is there? The blood from LA goes to LV, then LV blood goes to RV. When this blood goes to RV, then this whole blood goes to lung. This blood supposed to go to body, but this goes there. When body receive less blood, so there is a failure to thrive. Child will not gain the weight. Child will not gain the weight because this blood supposed to go to the body. This blood supposed to go to the body with turn here and goes to the, because of VSD, turn here and goes to the lung. If excessive blood goes to the lung, what will happen? Child will have complaint of recurrent RTI, and child will presented to us with CHF, recurrent respiratory tract infection. Mother will tell, my baby will having pneumonia every month. Okay, because increased flow goes to the lungs. That's why repeated infection. CHF, mother will not tell my child is having CHF. Mother will tell you, my baby breathe very fast. When I feed, become increased sweating is there. Then poor weight gain is there. Interrupted feeding is there. All these 4 points suggest it is a CHF picture. Okay. So in VSD, recurrent respiratory tract infection, and child is having feature suggestive of CHF. And failure to thrive, weight gain is not there because less blood reaches to body. Now what happened? If we close the VSD, we close the VSD. We close the VSD. If we close the VSD, what happened? This is, we close the VSD by patch or by device. VSD is closed. Now the blood which is going to lung previously will not able to go, and whole blood is goes to body. So there will be weight gain will be there. So no failure to thrive occur. Child comes to you VSD. What symptom will improve? The failure to thrive will improve. Why? Because the blood which is going into the lung, when you close the VSD, that blood will not go into the lung. It blood goes to the body straight. So weight gain is there. So failure to thrive will improve once you close the VSD. Once you close the VSD, child weight will start improving. We saw so many patients. 1 year old child weight 5 kg, large VSD. Once we close the VSD, child start gaining weight rapidly. So this is it's very easy question. What symptom will improve following the operation of VSD? Just if you know the concept of VSD, symptoms of VSD, you can crack this question. I hope you are clear. This is an easy question. Now, osteomalacia with high urinary phosphate level indicate. This question can be discussed in biochemistry, can be discussed in orthopedics, but I feel it's a pediatric question because rickets, familial vitamin D resistant rickets, vitamin D dependent rickets, vitamin D deficiency rickets, it's a thing to be discussed in pediatrics. Osteomalacia, what is rickets and what is osteomalacia? What is rickets? They are asking about osteomalacia, but choices are rickets. What is rickets and what is osteomalacia? They are asking about the osteomalacia, but choices are given rickets. So osteomalacia is defective mineralization of growing bone. Osteomalacia is defective mineralization of mature bone, and rickets is defective mineralization of growing bone. I told you previously in my slides, this is the bone. This is the bone. Calcium and phosphorus required for mineralization of bone. If vitamin D deficiency occur, bone mineralization will not take place. If it's a growing bone, then we use the word rickets. Osteomalacia is a defective mineralization of mature bone. It's a growing bone, we use the word rickets. Now they ask, high urinary phosphate level indicate. I told you very nicely in my class about familial vitamin D resistant rickets. What happened in this ricket? This is renal tubule. This is phosphorus. Phosphorus absorption is blocked. So more phosphorus comes in the urine. then more phosphorus comes in the urine, blood phosphorus is low. Another name for vitamin D resistant rickets is hypophosphatemic rickets. Another name for vitamin D resistant rickets is hypophosphatemic rickets. Why we called it hypophosphatemic rickets? Because phosphorus is low. And why we called it vitamin D resistant ricket? Because this ricket is not going to heal by only vitamin D. Not going to heal. We need to add oral phosphorus in this. We need to add oral phosphorus in this. That's why we called it hypophosphatemic rickets, vitamin D resistant rickets. In vitamin D resistant ricket, urinary phosphate level is increased. Urinary phosphate level is increased. This is the table. See the urinary phosphorus level. It is increased in vitamin D resistant rickets. Second point I told you in my class of rickets. Another key point in which 6-7 MCQs are there. 6-7 MCQs are there. Very important point. I want answer from you. Classical point of vitamin D resistant rickets. Classical point. 6-7 MCQs are there on that point. In vitamin D resistant ricket, PTH level is always normal. PTH is normal. If you know nothing about rickets, just remember two things. Vitamin D resistant rickets have normal PTH and urinary phosphorus increase. Your most of the question will be solved. Vitamin D resistant rickets have PTH level is normal. To discuss rickets completely, it take half an hour for me to start from all the catabolism of vitamin D3. For summary, for question discussion, I gave you the concept. What is osteomalacia? Defective mineralization of mature bone. What is rickets? Defective mineralization of growing bone. So how can we differentiate ricket? By see the urinary phosphorus and PTH level. In familial vitamin D resistant rickets, urinary phosphate is increased. Urinary phosphorus is increased. That's why another name for vitamin D resistant ricket is hypophosphatemic rickets. Because phosphorus loss in the urine. Another point is PTH level is normal. I hope it's clear to you. Now, 2-3 controversial question I didn't find most answer in this. Child transfer object from one hand to another. What it implies? That's it. Visual motor coordination. That's all. Object release is a casting. Casting appear at 13 months. That's another good MCQs which asks so many times. Casting. When a child able to throw the thing, it's a casting which appear at 13 months of age. But when transfer object from one hand to another, it's a visual motor coordination. Transfer object occur at 7 months of age. I think it's a easy question. Now I want your support in this question. I go through all the question, but this question I am not able to find a correct answer. Probably I am not getting the correct choice in this. Not a criteria for severe acute malnutrition. If we go with the WHO classification, what is WHO classification of malnutrition? This is WHO classification of malnutrition. Given in your GAI also. Edema is a part of this classification. Weight for height is a part of this classification. Height for age is a part of this classification. Okay, but not weight for age is not there in this classification. Then what is this? Mid-arm circumference also not in this classification. So this question, what they are exactly asking, acute severe malnutrition. They are asking according to IAP classification or according to WHO classification, something missing in the choices. So I want your support. If anything is there, I can help you. But for my side, answer would be weight for age is less than 3 standard deviation, which Kalpesh, Wings, most of the things I put the right answer. Okay. So because weight for height is given in the WHO classification, less than 3 standard deviation. Mid-arm circumference, less than 11, and edema is there. Edema is also a part of WHO classification. So these three are there. In age for weight is not given here. Age for weight is not given in the WHO classification. This is not the choice. So what is the summary of this AIIMS paper? Yeah, the topics on TM, diarrhea, vitamin, immunization questions are there. The questions are well uh, their questions are well taught to you in various unacademy classes by me and other faculties in different subjects also. Rickets is a common topic. Bilirubin is a common topic. Very well teach you in the biochemistry session also. Pathology faculty also teach. Other pediatrics faculty also teach all these things to you nicely. But this is not a tough paper. The questions are very simple. You need to concentrate, stuck on the basic, and read this test session, free session regularly. We are for you with our all experience. I have 19-year experience in teaching. I am teaching since 2001. All the AIMS paper I go through every year. So just go with our experience. What the things we teach you, I teach you in my previous class. PM is a 100% topic to come the question. Diarrhea, immunization. So I cover all these things. So this is the from me. I myself, Dr. Sanjay Khatri, definitely to crack PG, join Unacademy. If you join me, more discuss with me on you have more query, this is my Telegram link. So from my side, bye bye. Keep reading, keep trust on yourself and trust God. Bye. Hope you like the class. Thank you very much.